Welcome to Every Night is Game Night, your home for heavy strategy, awesome theme, and everything in between. Check us out along with other great podcasts at dicetowernetwork.com.
Every Night is Game Night, episode 143, U-Boat and Game of Thrones. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. So this week's episode is a little bit of an odd duckling in that you may have heard it before. At least in its original form on a couple of other podcasts that I have guested on recently. So just to let you guys know, I am moving. I am moving within Connecticut. I'm going to be moving up closer to Hartford. Got my own place. Going to get everything set up. But you know what that means? A lot of busyness, a lot of packing. So this week, what I'm going to do with the ENGN episode is reach out to the work that I've already done and give you an episode. So this is a mashup of two guest spots that I did. The first one is over on Co-opcast, I guess One Stop Co-op Shop, which it is called now. My friend Steve and Elijah, we did a full hour on U-Boat, the board game, the simulation submarine board game that is fully cooperative, real-time, app integrated. A lot of discussion on that one. So I'm going to bring you clips from that episode and put them here. In particular, I'm putting the beginning and end of that review. I'm not going to play the whole hour. If you want to hear our extended thoughts, Steve and Elijah's extended thoughts, go ahead and shoot over to Co-opcast. One of their recent episodes is on U-Boot, I believe episode 95 or thereabouts. Getting close to 100, guys. Congratulations. So I will be putting it here and doing the review of U-Boot. Spoiler alert. I laugh every time I do this because I just let you know whether I like the game or not right away. I really don't care. It's just, the analysis part is the more interesting one. I do like this game. I really enjoyed U-Boat. I wish I had more people to play it with. If I do eventually get people kind of drifting in my life to be interested in a World War II submarine simulator, come on down. I'd love to get it to the table again and check it out. So that's the first half of the episode. For the second half of the episode, it was my guest spot on the main flagship show, Board Gamers Anonymous. I had a chance to chat with Anthony and Chris about Game of Thrones. We are geeks for Game of Thrones, but it's not a review of the show. If you wanted to hear our thoughts about the show or our thoughts about the IP, I believe that's episode 222 over on BGA. Yep, they are piling along with the episodes. We're not that far from 200, so we might hit that by this time next year or so. We'll see. Despite my move, I'm going to try my best to maintain a consistent weekly schedule. I do believe that is one of the hallmarks of success, is to be able to maintain consistency despite life difficulties. And this isn't difficult. This is a happy thing. I'm really looking forward to being in a new home and bringing more and more Every Night is Game Night content to you. Think of this week as a little bit of a breather for me. And if you haven't heard those episodes on One Stop Co-op Shop and Board Gamers Anonymous respectively, then please enjoy. So, but first, you know how we roll here on ENGN. We are going to hear from Liz in the Liz We Trust segment, and then we're going to get to U-Boot and some Game of Thrones games. So until next week, later everybody.
Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here to encourage your Every Night is Game Night acquisition disorder. This week I want to talk about For What Remains, a 1 to 2 player skirmish game published by DVG and designed by David Thompson, who also designed Pavlov's House and co-designed War Chest. For What Remains is set in a post-apocalyptic world in which the remnants of humanity are fighting to survive. You can choose to play a quick one-off game, or enjoy a campaign in which your characters level up over time. Interestingly, you can also choose to back one of 3 separate core game boxes, or you can acquire multiples. It's possible to mix and match, which can lead to a lot of replayability. If you're into skirmish-level war games with interesting backstories, then For What Remains might be for you. Happy gaming!
But with that enough said, let's jump into our review. If this is your first time listening, we do a top 5 review where we each choose 5 things you need to know about this game. And we list them from 5 being the least most important thing you need to know about it, and 1 being the most important thing you need to know. And along the way, each of these points we'll list them to be a pro, con, or mix. So with that said, let's have our guests go first. Jason, if you don't mind, what's your number 5?
What? Me?
Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for this. Someone else go.
Okay.
Hot potato. I'm good. Okay. So my number 5, not a positive, not a negative, not a mixed. I'm not really sure. It's more of a discussion and more of a thing to think about. It is the fact that so it's a sim like we talked about earlier, and it puts you in the position of the Germans in World War II in submarine, doing submarine things, as in, you're making war, you're not just like floating around doing random missions. You're shooting down, ships and, shooting down airplanes and all that kind of stuff. So what some people have said online is that you're playing a Nazi, and that's what this is. Like, you're playing the German forces during World War II. And I think that so to be clear, like, there's no iron crosses, I believe, in any of the iconography in the book. It's not speaking out like, okay, this is a Nazi game. However, if you don't have to go far to put 2 and 2 together and come up with the conclusion that you're playing on the Nazi side, which might be a thing for some people, if you really think about it. Some people just don't care. They want to play, in this world, but it's there. So I'm not sure what to think about it. I just wanted to kind of raise it as an issue. So I don't know if you guys thought about it from that perspective, that people engaging with this game might have a problem with the fact that they're expected to immerse themselves in the world of playing a Nazi.
It's actually funny you mention this, because I'm a big history buff, and we are actually talking about it at Steve's house when we played. So one thing that's kind of unique in the Kriegsmarine service was since the sailors were sort of out in the ocean and their wolf packs, the strength, I guess I will say, of the Nazism didn't come across quite as strongly as the land forces. So, I mean, you had the Gestapo, the SS, the brown shirts, and they're really indoctrinated, right? The radio and sort of in town and roughing people up and make sure you vote. And the Kriegsmarine were almost a little bit more removed from that, because it was really get off your boat, enjoy girls and spend some of your money in town, and then hop back on the boat and go back out on another tour. And so I don't think there was as much Nazism, on the boat, Hail Hitler and stuff like this. And so there's a good book that was written by a gentleman who served on one. And he talked about that, how when they met the land soldiers and stuff, it was just very distinct. They almost felt like they could see the brainwashing and propaganda in them, because they didn't really see it much. Because when you're out in the sea, you're radio silent and things like that. So I totally get what you're saying. As you said, there's no overt sort of Nazism symbolism and things like that in the app and whatever. But yeah, you do have to understand, when you write "sink this merchant," it is probably American or British. And, so it's very actually a good point.
So, I mean, something to think about. I mean, I'm glad you actually articulated that, because it was a disconnect for me. I didn't know if the game was intentionally hiding the Nazi symbolism for, access purposes. No, it really is the fact that this was kind of this satellite operation, which, I kind of makes sense. But it's still, not a lot of people are going to make that distinction. And it's a thing.
And so now we're on to our number ones. I've got kind of a 2-part number one minor note, or kind of minor note, and that's going to be a con, actually. And that's, or it was mentioned, was the lack of save feature. I think this is a pretty big problem, because it would be really nice to just keep the board game on the table and be able to come back to the app later. But I know they're working on it, so that's why I want to just put a quick note in here that it will likely get fixed in the future, but at the time of the recording, it's not there yet. But outside that, we have another number one, which I suspect we all might have the same one.
Come on, let's just spit it out. The number one is going to be the same thing.
Yes, it's the immersion of this game is absolutely ridiculous in a good way. It is amazing.
Yep, I had best sub simulator out there in its historical theme and immersion. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this game is. And I've seen the comments online too, other people mentioning about this and how immersive this game is. You really, when we're playing, I forget about the time. Like, oh my gosh, we were playing with Elijah, and he came over in the morning, and I know we had to order some lunch at some point to take care of that. And we looked at the time, like, holy crap, wait, it's way past noon already, and we haven't even talked about food because we're just so engrossed in what's happening, and we've got these sound effects happening where like you're underwater and you hear the enemy searching for you, and everyone's kind of quiet, and you hear the sonar ping, and you kind of start scrambling like, crap, they found us, and like, what do we do now? Or hear depth charges coming down, you have to figure out what to do. Or maybe you're silent, they haven't picked you up, and you hear the low rum of the prop blades above you, and oh my gosh, holy crap, that just really sinks into you.
Yes, thematic immersion. This game, you're that's what you're getting for this game. I have a little bit of a twist on it though. So yes, thematic immersion. We talked about the app, talked about cooperation. It's all in service of this immersive experience. The thing that I felt like stuck out to me in terms of that part is thematic immersion makes bad mechanisms good. So hear me out. Targeting in this game sucks. Like, it sucks. You have to move things with a protractor, and you have to move your ship, and you have to there's this, the navigator has these little independent tokens, and it's almost like they're playing Battleship on their little pad over here, and it's like, okay, I need to intercept this vector, and the navigation disc is like this intimidating thing to start, and it's like, there's so much, and like showing it at a library, people, like seeing the confusion wash over people as they're engaging with the game. And we got to the targeting, we sunk a ship, and it just felt very clunky, but that's what happened in those ships. So it goes from this frustrating experience to, oh my goodness, that's how they targeted. It was this inexact science with protractors and graphing paper, and they had to do it. And I'm just sitting here in my table. I can, kind of wrap my mind around what's happening and try to make it happen too. And like you guys said, the more you play it, the more it just kind of becomes second nature. Okay, there's a murder ship over there. I have to take out the protractor. I have to calculate my vector and my bearing. And oh my goodness, the ship is passing by. We better get off a torpedo, and we have to sink it. And so, and also the firing a torpedo, we have to flood the chamber. It's like, oh my God, we didn't flood the chamber. Why isn't the torpedo working? And all that stuff is so frustrating, but in service of this awesome goal of thematic immersion. And it's a risky move. Like, it would have been really easy to simplify all that, to streamline all that. What do we like to say about games? A lot of games is it's streamlined. That's a good thing. There's nothing streamlined about this game, but it works. And it just underscores the point that, like, if you want to make a truly thematic game, you have to take some risks on some questionable mechanisms, as long as you make sure that it's in service of that theme.
Okay, I agree with you on a lot of those points. I've been watching this game forever. It was a rumor on BGG for years, and somehow Steven and I ended up talking about it. And I've looked for a good sub game. So I mean, I've read some books about U-boat stuff and World War II. I'm a huge fan and stuff, and just all history in general. And I've tried other stuff, but a lot of them are counters, your traditional war game. Much more abstract, and there's a couple out there that come pretty close. So, for example, certain torpedoes are available during certain years, right? Taking it to that next level, like that. The Germans had come up with different technology for the torpedo heads, and then the motors were more reliable, and then the steam versus electric and things like this, and they're just dry though, and that's what this game gets is its table presence, the app integration, the theme, and just the way that they honor history, like you had said, right? It just sucks. Flood that torpedo tube and all these protractor and like tactical. That's how it was, right? These boats were just crazy difficult and had problems. Things broke down and all of that. And Steve and I were talking about the survival rate on them was terrible. I mean, it's amazing that these guys volunteered. And so I think it's the best sub board game you're going to get in my mind. Its table presence is huge. It takes up a lot, but it's totally worth the experience. And I think it does it really well.
Yeah, that with the navigator trying to figure out those attack vectors, that was pretty intimidating at first. And like me, admittedly didn't really know much of anything about submarine warfare. And actually, one thing we haven't mentioned is in the box they do not only come with a rule book, but it also comes with a tactical guide, which is actually pretty nice and giving you some basic concepts on how submarines operate back then. It's kind of an additional reading. You don't have to read it, but I do recommend the owner of the game to read it, or at least someone be aware of it, because it took me a while to understand those attack vectors and like how important it is to broadside and how much of a factor that comes in play with making a successful attack run. And now that I've played it a few times and I feel like I've got that understood, it helps a lot. Now I can ratchet up that difficulty in that for that role for myself, for example. But yeah, there's definitely a quite a bit of skill in this game and stuff I'm still trying to learn. And I think a perfect example is my stupidity at captain, which was actually a pretty important story. So Elijah and I were playing, and so we're sailing along, going to some other destination, and so soon enough we get 3 contacts pop up. And so we scout out there. There's an escort up ahead with 2 merchants behind it. Like, ooh, this is really tempting. I think we should do this. So like we get all prepped up. We're nice attack vector. We decide to go underwater, submerge. And just as we're underwater, we get another contact pops up. Like, whoa, what is this contact? It's a 3rd merchant ship. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to do this. So anyway, we get our attack vectors in, we flood the tubes, get 3 torpedoes lined up, and we fire these 3 torpedoes at these merchant ships. And the tension's building as you see this. There's a counter actually tells you how far it is to hit target for each of these torpedoes. That's really exciting. So, but anyway, long story short, we hit all 3 merchant ships, and the escort doesn't know where we are because we're already underwater. So, and then Elijah turns to me and says, okay, cool, we did a great job. Now where do we go now? Do we have to do some evasive maneuvers? And I'm looking at I'm navigator, so I'm looking at the board. I'm like, well, we kind of have to go straight anyway to get to our destination. So he doesn't know where we are. Well, we'll be fine. We'll just go straight. And then soon enough, as we approach closer, the escort is dropping depth charges, and me, being dumb as a captain, forgot that depth charges come off the back of the escort. And so we just drove straight into that depth charge and blew up, basically.
Yeah, it was great. And I will say, Steve, you're a really great navigator because I'm first officer, right? And he's like, wait, what's the bearing of the enemy? Right, 242 or whatever. And he's like, okay, so let's change course this. And I'm like, dude, what the heck are you doing? And like, sure as daylight, right? We surface and they're like right there. Perfect. And I was like, dude, you line this up like so good. So it was a lot of fun. But yeah, we call you Captain Straight On into the enemy depth charge because that was like no evasive, just straight through the wake. But it was a lot of fun.
Well done, Steve. You're a pro.
Thanks. So note to others, don't have me captain when we play this game together. So that's going to summarize our top 5 points of this game. Let's go into final thoughts, and we'll have our guest start, I think. Jason, what's your final thoughts on this game?
So I really enjoyed this game. It's so hard to talk about because there's stuff that I really, really liked. There's one aspect that I found super frustrating, and it might ultimately be the thing that prevents this game from, like getting real table presence and because this game is a hard sell. I don't have a lot of World War II submarine fans in my life. I'm not even one. I just like thematic experiences, and this is definitely that. So the theme and the cooperation and the love that went into this game, I like the app immersion. There's so much that I really like about this game. However, just the actual kind of way that the activations work and, the tokens and the fact that there's so much in the app and not in the rule books. You have to kind of figure out which am I playing easy, am I playing normal. It takes away from what could be just a unbelievable, thematic experience. It's definitely a connoisseur's game, in the strictest sense of the word, and I like that. I'm looking forward to them, what they do, and if they're able to kind of like settle on a system of rules that answers, some of the questions that people have. But, this game took a big swing. I think I'll call it a double. I gave this game 8 out of 10 on BGG, which is a pretty high grade for me. It needs a little bit more refinement in order for me to really give a recommendation to people who are looking at it. Production wise, a little bit rough, like we talked about. So, with all those provisos, I really enjoyed my engagement with this game.
Yeah, so I guess my final thoughts are I would echo a lot of what Jason said, and for me, It's the best sub simulator out there as far as thematics go, as far as immersion goes. It has a huge table presence. It's a big game. It takes up a lot. It's not something that I would bring to Christmas or any kind of holiday with family because it's just it is very much a connoisseur game. I think it can be approachable to most people, but you would have to want to go on a sub in World War II and sync stuff, because if that doesn't interest you in the slightest, I don't know that you would appreciate the game. I think it's done well historically. I still love the app and how it integrates, but I would love to look for more updates there for the pausing and just different random missions and different things like that. So, but it's a solid game. I guess I'd probably agree with your 8. That sounds about right. I'm glad I backed it. I'm glad I own it. I can't see me trading it away ever. It's just a lot of fun. It's not something I'm going to play all the time, but when I'm looking for that sort of a lot going on, tension, and I want to be in a sub World War II, this is the go-to game for me.
Yeah, so there's definitely some issues with this game for sure. I think, hopefully highlighted these to our listeners on some of the shortfalls of it. But when I was super excited for this game for the longest time, and there were some issues with it delivering on time, so unfortunately my excitement dwindled. I got to the table, I was like, well, we'll see what it is. My excitement level isn't that high, and I absolutely loved it. I love this game. It's so much fun. I'm not going to say it's going to be my top game all the time. No way. But it's definitely up there. And I was curious about how this theme and game will approach someone who's really not interested in it. So I had asked my wife, for example, to sit down and play with me. This is not really her style game at all, to be honest. So she sat down and played it, and then her response was like, "Man, this is really taxing and strategic." And she kind of was struggling because there's so much going on. I don't know if I can handle this. But while she was actually playing it, she was doing all the roles and doing everything that she needed to do, and was doing fine at the game. So I'm not sure if it's a mental bridge, yes, that's there to overcome. And it ultimately might not be for her, especially with the theme. I think, Jason, we talked about it earlier, that's a great point that this theme is definitely not for everyone. But I love stealth games, and this gives me that ability to be stealth in a unique game experience. Not to mention, I don't really know of any other board games that cross into the simulation zone. So it definitely holds a spot on my shelf for that. I like it enough where when I got it, I opened it up, played it a few times, and it never left my table. I stayed set up for almost a week straight as I was learning more about the game, experimenting with different things, and learning all different roles. And yeah, I'm a big fan of this game. This is a strong recommend for me, assuming apps aren't a turnoff for you, and the theme itself is at least a little interesting. I would definitely recommend trying this out.
All right, so that was Steve and Elijah from One Stop Co-op Shop Podcast talking about U-Boot. Now we turn to Anthony, Chris, and myself. Anthony and Chris from Board Gamers Anonymous. We talk about some Game of Thrones games, the best ones in our opinion, A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones Living Card Game, and Game of Thrones the board game.
So the next one here is the reason I probably wouldn't play it, and that's A Song of Ice and Fire tabletop miniatures game. This is the biggie. This is the current big, massive miniatures game based on A Song of Ice and Fire, and you can tell this one's based on the books because they don't use the name Game of Thrones. It's the only game on this list that doesn't use that. It is A Song of Ice and Fire, and I don't know that you can necessarily tell. I mean, other than the fact that there's more characters out there that would be recognizable if you've read them. But this is a full-blown miniatures game from CMON, designed by Eric Lang and Michael Chanel. And it is expensive. It is large. It has dozens of expansions. If you're a board gamer, you probably look at this and think, ugh, that's so much stuff, which is what I did when it was on Kickstarter, because too much stuff, right? It was hundreds of dollars. But the game itself does a really good job of kind of taking what makes miniature games so appealing. So the potential for large scale battles on these massive tables with hundreds of miniatures out there, and marries it with accessible mechanics that are board gamer friendly. The problem is just kind of how it's packaged in the end. So I think a lot of people have avoided this because it's very expensive and it's a 2-player game, right? Mechanically speaking, though, it has a lot of different unique things to it. So activations alternate. People are constantly doing things. There's not like, I'll do all my stuff, you do all your stuff. It's like it's back and forth, right? Similar to like a lot of the card games. There's a rank system, so units can upgrade and get more powerful as the battle goes on. The tactics system provides a whole bunch of different things that you can do with specific resources that kind of run out over the course of the game. The heroes are there, and in some cases, they're less interesting than others. A lot of the times they just sit off the map, and maybe they have a power, but they don't do much despite having the miniature. Other times you can bring them onto the map. Like you can get your Jaime Lannister and throw him out there, and he can, wipe the floor with anybody around him. It's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun, and I really wish it was packaged in a way that was more board gamer friendly. Now I know that's why not what they were trying to do. They were trying to build a new tabletop miniature game line, but there's just so much content here in this box, and that's just kind of the high overview. Like there's multiple different game modes. You could get the Night's Watch, you could get the Wildlings, you could get all these different factions that they're now releasing, and just so much content here to work through. I cannot get it out to the table because it is a 2-player miniature game and needs a lot of a table space to play, but it is really good. So if you're looking for miniatures in Game of Thrones, this is it.
What did they try here? Like, are they trying to horn in on like the Warhammer space? So like game stores that dedicated their back rooms to these big tables and everything to Warhammer and Robotech and the different big dudes in the map. Did they want this game to horn into that space? And is it doing so?
I mean, question one, yes. And they as much told us so. Like when we discussed it with them back at Gen Con last year, it's like, yeah, we want this to be big. We're doing event kits. We're doing all this stuff. Second answer, I don't think so. Like one of my local stores started doing a thing, and that lasted, maybe they did 2 events and not enough people showed up, and then they stopped doing them. Like it's... the Kickstarter was really the best way to get all the stuff, and it's just the classic CMON problem of if you backed it, you got this giant box of extra stuff. If you didn't back it, you don't get that stuff. But now you have kind of a competitive 2-player war game. People want all the stuff, and they can't get it now. Combined with the fact that it's just very expensive to jump into it like any miniatures game, and so people who already play miniatures games have already invested in something. You're trying to get new people in. I don't know what the market is for these, and all these companies keep doing it. Star Wars Legion was the same thing. Like no one's playing it. Seems it's a good game, but nobody's playing it, so why would I keep spending money on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a shame.
All right, Jason, you got one for us too, right?
I have probably my favorite of the Game of Thrones games. I am not normally a competitive dueling person. I'm a big co-op fan, but I mean the Game of Thrones living card game is, spoiler alert, I really, really like it. I've only played a couple of times. I just throw it out there, man. I don't keep the people waiting. I was like, okay.
We need the sizzle, man.
Wait, what happened to not rushing to a final conclusion right off the bat, man?
Yeah, let it develop. Nah, man, you get it. I'm just gonna serve it right hot and fresh.
We can't come to a really disappointing ending either.
You will not be disappointed with this one. I can guarantee it. If you like anything about like dueling card games, and this is it's exactly what it is. So it's a living card game. So there was a first edition, and first edition was just, oh my god. I mean, tons of expansions. You could probably get a whole sets for, I don't know. When they were first announced second edition, people would sell off their sets for like thousands of dollars. Okay, so you had a whole bunch of stuff. They changed some things for the second edition. I don't think if you happen to have the first edition, it's going to be that different. But the second edition, it's good too, and it's a good entry point. I think they wanted to reboot so that let people, kind of new people, trickle in, which is a perfectly fine goal. Because especially the first edition got very intimidating. So at the heart of it is. So in Magic the Gathering, you're kind of trying to destroy one another, and you can do a lot of manipulation, but at the end of the day, you have to kind of deal damage and hit points. This game does it a lot differently. This isn't a directly competitive game. What you're doing is, you have your deck. I think it's at least 60 cards that you have to have, and you can deck construct and put your decks together and everything. A very craftable game. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to get influence or power. Yeah, power, I think, is the main currency of the game. You're like the first faction to get 15 glory or power, or whatever you want to call that, is going to be the winner. And so every round, you're going to go through various phases. So first you have your plot phase, which basically gives a meta to the round. So like every round is a little bit different. So like this round, you can only play this type of card, and that round you can only, if you play your big heroes, then something else happens. So every round feels a little bit different because of the meta that you play. So those are your plot cards. And then during the main phase, you're going to be summoning your heroes and heroes, villains, everybody. Like that's the great thing about a living card game. You can fit every single character, even like Sky has shave paint or the like weirdo characters that only book readers would know. You can fit into a card game like this. So then you play them, and then you're gonna kind of declare a combat against whoever. You can play this game as a melee format with multiple people. So then you can either fight them head up if your characters have that skill, the fighting skill, or you can do what's called influence, which is basically make them discard cards. So, there's two different ways, kind of emulating the fact that this is not like the Game of Thrones world is not this rock'em sock'em world. Like there's also backstabbing and chicanery. You only do so much in a card game to emulate that, but at least they kind of approach it differently. And then the third type of combat you could do is just basically power or dominance. I have the more glorious house, and therefore I get more points, quote unquote. So that's all you're doing every single turn. And, the strategy is in how do you defend, how do you attack, how do you buff, how, do I open, launch a bunch of attacks and leave myself open to the other person's attacks? Do I, what's in my hand? How can I buff, what's coming out of there? And that's on a mechanical end. On a thematic end, there's some fun stuff that you can do. One of the games that I played, my opponent had the Lannisters, and Joffrey came out, and Joffrey had this thing where like he got glory whenever he got to kill somebody, which is exactly what Joffrey would do. He gets glee every time he cuts off somebody's head, especially if they're not of your faction. So like if a big person I was playing had a bunch of Starks in his deck. And Joffrey murders Arya and Sansa and gets a bunch of glory. That's exactly what Joffrey would do in that particular case. And so there's these little thematic moments. It's not a thematic game, but there's enough thematic moments to make it satisfying for a Game of Thrones fan, and the gameplay is good too. So I'm not a guy that just goes into these competitive card games, but as a fan of the show, as a fan of if I were to like get into like a group that played this a lot, then I'll be really happy. Chris, I think you're a guy that played this game, right?
I did. I played the first edition a lot, and I really enjoyed it. As I mentioned earlier, like just trying to avoid some of the spoilers, but the card game really doesn't go out of its way to spoil anything for you. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of odd characters here, and obviously they're not depicted, directly in the show like they are in the artwork or in the book. So you can completely play the game. And if you're not looking very hard, you can kind of avoid those. But the game is so fun and dynamic, and you really do get to play that house. And as you mentioned, the characters, their power levels and what they can influence depends completely upon whatever their characteristic happens to be. So Jon Snow is going to be out there battling, where Sansa is going to be doing political intrigue kind of stuff. And that's really a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And they do a really good job of like, building up the combo. So like, the Baratheon deck, if you get, it's called kneeling, which is tapping your cards, which I really dislike how every game is forced to call tapping something different. It's really annoying. But like in this particular game, it kind of makes sense because if a card is kneeling, which means it's tapped, then like Robert Baratheon will get a bunch of buffs. And then, Stannis Baratheon will give buffs, depending on how many cards are kneeling already. So like the game does a really good job. It's not just like a blind, no, I'm going to play a card, you're going to play a card. You can really get into the strategic combo-ness of it. There's a reason why they rebooted it for a second edition. There's a reason why it's actually, it's not the most popular collective card game, but they're keep on releasing sets, and it's a really, really awesome game. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And finally, we want to talk about the big daddy of all Game of Thrones games. That's Game of Thrones, the board game, second edition. Now, first edition came out quite some time ago. Never got a chance to play that edition, but second edition does streamline a lot of the rules in the board game. And basically, this is the board game of all of the great houses battling out. It's an area control game. It's somewhat dudes on the map, but it's not really so much about that. You are trying to conquer different castles and get a certain number in order to win. But at the same time, the game doesn't play like Risk. You really have to strategize the different things you're doing because you are managing supplies, you are managing how many troops you can have in each individual region. There's influence tracks throughout the game that are going to determine things like player order and if you can break ties. Ties are actually very important in this game. And then there's combat bonuses. Yeah. So a lot of different stuff in the game. In addition, there's wildling attacks because of course there is. So everyone has to contribute, like in Game of Thrones, the Catan version, in order to keep them back and in order for everyone not to take major damage throughout the game. But basically, the game is all kind of circling around this planning phase. So in the planning phase, you're going to have your house, and your house is going to be represented by these really cool translucent color tokens, and you're going to have just your same starting place like you do on the map of Westeros. And you're going to play these tokens, and the tokens are going to designate what your troops or what your area is going to do. So you can march, you could defend, you could support not just your armies, but other people as well. You can raid, which takes out other people's tokens. You can consolidate power, which is going to help you muster units and score victory points towards the end. Then the action phase happens where these tokens flip over and the different actions take place, including combat. Combat's a little cumbersome. It's kind of like this 5-stage process where you have these pieces on the board, I have those pieces on my board, I have support tokens, you have support tokens, you have raid tokens, and then we play cards because cards. And the cards do things because now you need someone to lead the troops, and that's going to kind of throw things into a little bit of havoc. So throughout the game, you can and should negotiate with the neighboring houses in order to gain the most area control possible. And then just like every area control game, once somebody gets too far, you try to kind of bring them back. Now, the original base game is fantastic, but it is very, very long to play. This is a all-day, 6-hour type of game if you play with the full player count, which is highly recommended because if you leave a gap, that's going to give somebody a free space to kind of expand into without any challengers. Now, the expansion that just came out, Mother of Dragons, kind of takes care of that. So now that section is taken up by other players throughout the game, so you have some control over those different areas as the game goes on. The expansion also adds the Targaryens, right? So you will have Daenerys in the game, and you will have her dragons. And what's really cool about this expansion is she plays differently. Her dragons grow every other round, and she has to go certain places on the board, and because dragons can fly, they can go anywhere they want, and she gets to nuke a particular place in order to gain control of those regions. So there's an asymmetrical situation going on here. She's not trying to take over kingdoms in this situation. She's just trying to, I guess, capture allies and their allegiance, so to speak. There's also House Aaron that enters this game to make this an 8-player game if you have several days to play this game. And that changes the
feel like torturing yourself. Oh my God.
Yeah, it is a little torture, but not Ramsay Bolton level of torture. But it is a very long situation. But yeah, so 8 players is long. You can play with much less now because the way that the game handles those empty spaces where you actually control that situation. So you'll have vassals in those areas, and you control one and I control one, so the game balances out a lot better. Awesome. So I would always, always, always play with the expansion. That being said, this game is incredibly long, incredibly detailed. The rulebook is pretty difficult to get through, but once you play the game, once you're into the game, once you've played it once or twice, it is a very enjoyable experience, but is an extremely long and dedicated process that does reap rewards as long as you can go through a long and dedicated process. So I would just give this game a play because I think you should play it before you buy it. Even if you are a hardcore Game of Thrones fan, maybe one day Fantasy Flight will have a revised edition like they have TI4. But until then, this is good. But as long as you have dedicated gamers who are willing to kind of really, really push through a challenging rulebook that they'll have to jump back to several times.
I mean, if you like diplomacy, I mean, this is basically, they talk about spiritual successor. I mean, this is a diplomacy variant, just like the card game is a Magic variant. And there are people who don't like those games, and
Sure.
if you don't like those games, if you don't like diplomacy, if you don't like the constant engagement, and I really do like that. Like, you can obviously do your move and, you know, grab a soda and the board state
That's
will
right.
not change, but you might be missing out on opportunities to make an alliance. And there are people, like, I've seen people just completely laser in. I played this game for a month or so, like every week, just like, you know, because it's the same people, they just loved it.
Yes.
And you know, it was like a New York meetup and everything, and it was a whole meetup dedicated just to this board game, which is I'll tell you everything you need to know. And people were really into it. You could laser in, you could make alliances, you could, you know, you can choose if you want to just be laser focused in this game for like the entire 8 hours, read people's motives. And like, if that sounds good to you, then there's no better field to play in that space. And you have to be in. And if you're not in, then you're out. That's the unfortunate thing. Like the card game, you might have fun if you just casually. There is no casual playing of the board game.
It's true. All right, so that is everything from our Game of Thrones reviews. If you love Game of Thrones, definitely check these games out. If you're just a casual fan, take our advice, pick some of these games out that might work best for your group. Definitely don't jump out and buy them, because it's a pretty detailed and major investment in both in time and money. But in general, it's been a good genre. It's been some decent games out there, and it's been a so-so series so far.